The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Creek, Colorado, causing Lillian Vaughn to duck behind a water trough as bullets splintered the wood above her head. The year was 1875, and she had just witnessed the murder of the only person who had offered her shelter in this God-forsaken town. Heart pounding in her chest, Lillian gathered the tattered edges of her once fine dress and fled into the night, the moonlight casting long shadows as she ran toward the only place she could think of a way. 3 days later, exhaustion had settled deep into Lillian's bones as she stumbled along the rugged trail. Her city boots, now torn and blistered, were never meant for this terrain. The elegant dress she had arrived in was stained with dirt and sweat, its once vibrant blue fabric now dulled to a shadow of its former glory. The small satchel containing everything she owned, a hairbrush, a locket with her mother's portrait, and $12 weighed heavily in her hand. The distant sound of hoofbeats made her heart stutter. Without thinking, she plunged into the brush alongside the trail, thorns tearing at her skin as she crouched low. The approaching rider might be one of Miller's men, hunting her down for what she had witnessed. The horse slowed as it neared her hiding spot. Lillian held her breath, praying the pounding of her heart wasn't as loud as it seemed in her ears. "I can see you in there, madam." The voice was deep but gentle, not the harsh bark of Miller's thugs. "I don't mean you any harm." Lillian remained silent, weighing her options. Run deeper into the wilderness where she would surely perish, or face this stranger who might be lying about his intentions. "I've got water and food if you need it," the man continued. "You look like you could use some help." Her parched throat made the decision for her. Slowly, Lillian emerged from the brush, her hand clutching a small knife she had taken from the kitchen before fleeing. It was a pitiful defense, but it was all she had. The man on horseback was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially hidden beneath the wide brim of a dusty brown hat. He wore the practical clothing of a rancher or cowboy, a faded blue shirt, sturdy pants, and a weathered leather vest. His horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, stood patiently beneath him. "Isaac Nordstrom," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "I own the Double N Ranch about 5 miles east of here." Lillian clutched her knife tighter. "How do I know you're not one of Miller's men?" The cowboy's brow furrowed. "Franklin Miller, that snake from Silver Creek," he spat on the ground. "I'd sooner shoot myself than work for that man." His disgust seemed genuine, but Lillian had learned the hard way that men could be convincing liars. "Then why are you out here in the middle of nowhere, checking my fence lines?" he replied simply. "Found some cut wire yesterday, rustlers most likely." His eyes, a deep, earthy brown, studied her with concern. "You're a long way from anywhere, miss. And from the looks of it, you've been on the run for some time." Lillian didn't confirm or deny his assessment. "I'm just passing through." "Through to where?" he asked, his tone gentle but direct. "Next town's 40 miles east, and there's nothing but mountains to the west." The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. Lillian had been running without direction, without a plan. Where could she go? She had no family, no friends in this harsh territory. The money in her satchel wouldn't last more than a week. "I don't know," she admitted finally, her voice barely audible over the wind rustling through the prairie grass. Isaac Nordstrom dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping a respectful distance. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s. His face was tanned from working outdoors, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting against the sun rather than age. "Take some water, at least," he said, offering her a canteen. Lillian hesitated, then took it with trembling hands. The water was cool and sweet, and she had to force herself not to gulp it all down at once. "Thank you," she said, returning the canteen. "There's more," he assured her, "and food too." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a cloth-wrapped package. Nothing fancy, just some bread and jerky. The smell of the food made her stomach growl audibly, betraying her hunger. With a flush of embarrassment, she accepted his offering. "I have a proposition for you, miss," Isaac said as she ate. "My ranch is short-handed, lost 2 workers last month to gold fever. My sister Louise has been pestering me to hire some help for the house. It's honest work with room and board." Lillian eyed him suspiciously. Why would you offer work to a stranger you found hiding in the brush? Isaac shrugged. Because you look like you need it and I need the help. Simple as that. And your sister wouldn't mind, Lillian asked, still wary. Louise, she'd be delighted to have another woman around. It's just been the two of us since our parents passed 3 years ago. He paused. The offer stands until we reach the crossroads up ahead. After that, you can continue on your way if you prefer. Lillian considered her options. She could continue wandering with no destination and dwindling resources, or she could accept this unexpected offer of shelter and work. The cowboy seemed genuine, and the mention of his sister eased some of her concerns. "I'm Lillian Vaughn," she said finally, "and I accept your offer, Mr. Nordstrom, though I should warn you, I don't know the first thing about ranch work." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Call me Isaac, and don't worry about that. Louise will show you what needs doing." He helped her onto his horse, then led the animal by the reins. As they walked, Lillian found herself stealing glances at her unexpected benefactor. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet confidence that was reassuring after the chaos of the past few days. "You're running from something," Isaac said after they had traveled in silence for a while. It wasn't a question. Lillian stiffened. "I'd rather not discuss it." He nodded, accepting her reticence. "Fair enough, but if Miller's men are after you, I should know. The double N is my responsibility, and that includes everyone on it." The protectiveness in his voice surprised her. "How do you know I'm not a criminal? I could be a thief or worse." Isaac looked up at her, his expression thoughtful. "Are you?" "No," she replied honestly. "Then that's settled." He turned his attention back to the trail ahead. Lillian marveled at his easy trust. "You're a strange man, Isaac Nordstrom." That earned her another small smile. "So my sister tells me, almost daily." By the time the Double N Ranch came into view, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The ranch house was larger than Lillian had expected, a 2-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and in the distance, she could see a large barn and corrals containing horses. A woman emerged from the house as they approached, wiping her hands on an apron. She was shorter than Isaac, but shared his dark hair and eyes, though hers sparkled with curiosity as she took in the sight of Lillian. "Isaac Nordstrom, who have you brought home this time?" She called out, placing her hands on her hips in mock exasperation. "Louise, this is Miss Lillian Vaughn," Isaac introduced them as he helped Lillian down from the horse. "She's going to help around the house, if that suits you." Louise's face broke into a wide smile. "If it suits me." "I've been begging you for help for months." She turned to Lillian, her expression warm and welcoming. "You poor thing, you look exhausted. Come inside and we'll get you settled." Lillian glanced uncertainly at Isaac, who nodded encouragingly. "Go on." "I need to tend to Storm here and check on a few things in the barn. I'll see you at supper." Louise linked her arm through Lillian's and led her toward the house. "Don't mind my brother," she said once they were out of earshot. "He doesn't talk much, but he's got a good heart. Found a half-dead coyote pup last spring and nursed it back to health, then set it free when it was strong enough. That's the kind of man he is." The information was oddly comforting. Louise continued chatting as she showed Lillian to a small but clean bedroom on the second floor of the house. "This will be your room," Louise said. "The washroom is at the end of the hall. I'll bring up some hot water so you can clean up before supper, and I'm sure I have a dress or two that might fit you." Lillian was overwhelmed by the kindness. "Thank you, but I can't accept." "Nonsense," Louise interrupted firmly. "Those clothes you're wearing have seen better days, and we're about the same size. Besides, what are neighbors for if not to help each other?" "We're not neighbors," Lillian pointed out gently. Louise waved her hand dismissively. "You're living here now, aren't you? That makes us something closer than neighbors." Her eyes softened. "Whatever you're running from, Miss Vaughn, you're safe here." Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes, but she blinked them away. "Please call me Lillian." "Lillian it is," Louise agreed with a warm smile. "Now I'll fetch that water. Supper's in an hour." Left alone, Lillian sank onto the edge of the bed, her emotions a tangled mess. The room was simple but comfortable, with a patchwork quilt on the bed, a small dresser, and a rocking chair by the window that overlooked the corrals. After days of running and sleeping rough, it felt like a palace. She opened her satchel and removed the locket containing her mother's portrait. "What would you think of this, Mother?" she whispered. "Your daughter, a fugitive taken in by strangers." The familiar face in the portrait offered no answers, but Lillian felt a measure of peace as she clasped the locket around her neck once more. By the time Louise returned with the promised hot water and a clean dress, Lillian had composed herself. The warm bath was heaven after days of grime and fear, and the borrowed dress, a simple blue cotton with white trim, fit well enough. Supper was a simple but hearty affair: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh baked bread. Isaac, freshly washed and in a clean shirt, sat at the head of the table while Louise chattered about ranch business and local gossip. Lillian ate silently, savoring the home-cooked meal and the strange sense of normalcy. "Miller's been buying up land all around Silver Creek," Louise mentioned as she passed Isaac the potatoes. "Heard the Simmons place went to him last month after that mysterious fire." Isaac's expression darkened. "Nothing mysterious about it. Miller wanted their water rights and they refused to sell." Lillian tensed at the mention of Miller's name, her fork clattering against her plate. Both siblings looked at her with concern. "You all right, Miss Vaughn?" Isaac asked. "Yes, I'm sorry," Lillian replied, forcing herself to pick up her fork again. "Just tired, I suppose." Louise and Isaac exchanged a glance but didn't press her. The conversation shifted to safer topics. The new foal born in the spring, plans for expanding the vegetable garden, a letter received from a cousin back east. After supper, Lillian insisted on helping with the dishes despite Louise's protests that she should rest. As they worked side by side in the kitchen, Louise spoke quietly. "Isaac told me he found you on the trail from Silver Creek, that you might be in some trouble." Lillian stiffened. "Did he now? Don't be angry with him," Louise said quickly. "He was concerned, we both are." Lillian dried a plate with more force than necessary. "There's nothing to be concerned about." "Lillian," Louise said gently, "we can't help if we don't know what we're up against." The genuine worry in the other woman's voice broke through Lillian's defenses. She set down the dish towel with a sigh. "I witnessed something I shouldn't have. A murder. Franklin Miller shot a man in cold blood right in front of me," Louise gasped. "Oh, Lillian, no wonder you ran." "The man he killed was kind to me," Lillian continued, the words pouring out now. "Samuel Whitaker. He owned the general store in Silver Creek. I arrived in town 3 weeks ago looking for work. Mr. Whitaker gave me a job and a room above the store." She swallowed hard. "Miller wanted to buy the store, said it was the last piece of property on Main Street he didn't own. Mr. Whitaker refused, and Miller killed him for it," Louise finished, her expression grim. Lillian nodded. "I was stocking shelves in the back when Miller came in. They argued. I heard the gunshot and peeked out. Miller saw me before I could hide. I ran out the back, grabbed what I could from my room, and fled." "Did you go to the sheriff?" A bitter laugh escaped Lillian's lips. "Sheriff Daniels is in Miller's pocket. Everyone knows it." Louise reached out and squeezed Lillian's hand. "You did the right thing coming here with Isaac. Miller's influence doesn't reach this far." Lillian wasn't so sure about that, but she appreciated the comfort. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door, Louise. If Miller's men track me here, then they'll have to deal with Isaac and our ranch hands," Louise interrupted firmly. "And me. I'm a fair shot myself." She smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Now, let's finish these dishes and get you to bed. You look ready to drop." That night, in the unfamiliar comfort of a real bed, Lillian lay awake listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. The distant lowing of cattle, the occasional whinny of a horse, the creak of the house as it cooled in the night air. So different from the busy sounds of Chicago where she had grown up, or the raucous nights in Silver Creek with its saloons and brothels. Sleep eventually claimed her, but her dreams were haunted by the sound of gunshots and Miller's cold, calculating eyes. The next morning, Lillian woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting up from the kitchen below. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She was at the Double N Ranch, miles from Silver Creek and the danger that lurked there. Louise had laid out another dress for her, this one a warm brown that complemented Lillian's auburn hair. After washing and dressing, she made her way downstairs, following the appetizing smells to the kitchen. Louise stood at the stove, turning bacon in a cast-iron skillet while Isaac sat at the table reading a newspaper. Both looked up as she entered. "Good morning," Louise greeted cheerfully. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in days," Lillian admitted. Taking the seat Louise indicated, Isaac folded his newspaper and set it aside. "Louise tells me you worked in a general store in Silver Creek." Lillian nodded, accepting the cup of coffee Louise poured for her. "Yes, for Mr. Whitaker. We could use someone with that experience," he said. "Our regular supply run to town is coming up next week. Would you be willing to help with the ordering?" The request seemed simple enough, but Lillian detected something more behind it, a testing of her capabilities, perhaps, or an effort to make her feel useful. Either way, she appreciated the gesture. "Of course," she agreed. "I'd be happy to help." Breakfast was a lively affair, with Louise doing most of the talking. She outlined the day's tasks for Lillian, helping with the laundry, preparing vegetables from the garden for dinner, and possibly assisting with the mending if there was time. "Nothing too strenuous for your first day," Louise assured her. "We'll ease you into ranch life." After breakfast, Isaac departed for the day's work, touching his hat in a polite farewell. Lillian watched him go, struck by the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. He wasn't conventionally handsome like some of the men she had known in Chicago, but there was something compelling about his steady presence. The day passed in a blur of domestic tasks. Louise was a patient teacher, showing Lillian the proper way to wring out wet laundry so it would dry faster on the line, how to identify the ripest vegetables in the garden, and the best method for patching work shirts. "You're a quick learner," Louise praised as they hung the last of the washing on the line. "Most city folk take longer to adjust," Lillian smiled, pleased by the compliment. "My mother believed in practical education. She made sure I could cook, clean, and sew before I learned poetry or painting." "She sounds like a wise woman," Louise said. "Is she still in Chicago?" "No," Lillian replied softly. "She passed away last winter, influenza." Louise's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry, it's hard losing a parent." "It is," Lillian agreed. "My father died when I was 12, so it was just mother and me for years. After she was gone, there was nothing keeping me in Chicago. I thought heading west might offer a fresh start." "And instead, you found trouble," Louise observed. Lillian sighed. "The story of my life, it seems." Louise bumped her shoulder companionably. "Well, maybe this is where your luck changes." As the day progressed, Lillian found herself relaxing into the rhythm of ranch life. The work was hard but satisfying, and Louise's friendly chatter made the time pass quickly. By late afternoon, they had finished most of the chores and were sitting on the porch, shelling peas for dinner, when Isaac returned. He dismounted wearily, leading his horse toward the barn. His shirt was soaked with sweat, and there was a smudge of dirt across his face. Despite this, he paused to exchange a few words with one of the ranch hands, his expression serious as he nodded at whatever the man was telling him. "He works too hard," Louise murmured, following Lillian's gaze. "Has done ever since father died. Takes the weight of the whole ranch on his shoulders." "It's a lot of responsibility for someone so young," Lillian agreed. Louise shot her a knowing look. "He's not that young, 27 last May, and you're what, 21, 22? 22, Lillian confirmed, feeling her cheeks warm at Louise's obvious matchmaking. "And I'm not looking for anything of that nature, Louise. I've had my share of disappointments in that regard." "Of course," Louise said innocently, returning to her peas. "I was merely making conversation." Lillian wasn't fooled, but she let the subject drop. Isaac disappeared into the barn, and she turned her attention back to the task at hand, pushing away thoughts of the tall, serious cowboy and what Louise might be implying. Dinner that evening was a livelier affair than the previous night's supper. Two of the ranch hands joined them at the table: Tom Jensen, a grizzled older man with a booming laugh, and Caleb Morris, a quiet young man barely out of his teens. The conversation flowed easily with tales of the day's work and good-natured ribbing between the men. "Miss Vaughn here is from Chicago," Louise announced during a lull in the conversation. "She worked in a general store in Silver Creek before coming to us." Tom Jensen whistled. "Chicago. That's a far piece from Colorado territory, miss. What brought you out west? Adventure, I suppose," Lillian replied with a small smile. "Though I've found more than I bargained for." "Don't we all?" Tom agreed with a chuckle. "Came out here 30 years ago looking for gold. Found cattle instead and been working with them ever since." "Tom's been with the Double N since before I was born," Isaac explained. "Taught me everything I know about ranching," the older man puffed up with pride. "And you learned well, boy. Your pa would be proud of what you've done with the place." The praise seemed to embarrass Isaac, who quickly changed the subject. "Caleb, how's that new mare settling in?" As the men discussed horses, Lillian found herself watching Isaac more closely. There was a quiet dignity about him, a sense of purpose that she found intriguing. He caught her looking once and held her gaze for a moment before turning back to the conversation, leaving her oddly flustered. After dinner, as Lillian helped Louise clear the table, Isaac approached her hesitantly. "Miss Vaughn, I was wondering if you might join me for a walk. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Louise, overhearing, practically shooed them out the door. "Go on, I can finish up here. It's a beautiful evening for a walk." The sun was setting as they stepped outside, casting long shadows across the yard. Isaac led her toward a small rise behind the house, his stride measured to accommodate her shorter legs. They walked in silence until they reached the top of the hill, where a single oak tree stood sentinel. "This is my thinking spot," Isaac said, gesturing to a worn wooden bench beneath the tree. "Best view on the ranch," Lillian had to agree. From here, she could see the entire ranch spread out below. The house with its welcoming lights, the barn and corrals, the bunkhouse where the hands stayed, and beyond, the vast expanse of grazing land that made up the Double N. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. Isaac nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. "My father staked this claim 25 years ago, said he knew it was special the moment he saw it." He hesitated, then continued. "Louise told me about what happened in Silver Creek, about Miller and Samuel Whitaker." Lillian stiffened. "I wish she hadn't." "I'm glad she did," Isaac countered gently. "Miller is a dangerous man, Miss Vaughn. If he's looking for you, we need to be prepared." "That's exactly why I should leave," Lillian insisted. "I don't want to bring his vengeance down on you and Louise." Isaac's expression hardened. "Franklin Miller doesn't scare me. He's a bully who thinks money and hired guns make him untouchable." "They do in Silver Creek," Lillian pointed out. "This isn't Silver Creek," Isaac replied firmly. "The Double N has stood against worse than Miller in its time." His confidence was reassuring, but Lillian wasn't convinced. "Why would you risk it? You barely know me." Isaac was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in vivid hues. "My father used to say that a person's character is revealed in how they treat those who can't help them in return. We have the means to offer you sanctuary, Miss Vaughn. It would be wrong not to." The simple morality of his statement touched something deep within Lillian. "You're a good man, Isaac Nordstrom," he smiled slightly, the expression softening his usually serious face. "I try to be." He turned to face her directly. "So you'll stay, at least until we figure out a more permanent solution?" Lillian hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I'll stay, thank you." They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell, watching as stars appeared one by one in the vast Colorado sky. It was a peace Lillian hadn't experienced in a long time, perhaps ever. The knowledge that Miller might still be hunting her lingered at the edges of her consciousness. But for this moment, sitting beside the quiet cowboy on his hilltop sanctuary, she felt safe. As the days passed, Lillian settled into life at the Double N with surprising ease. The routine of ranch life up at dawn, hard work throughout the day, early to bed suited her well. Louise became a fast friend, filling the void left by her mother's death with sisterly affection and good humor. Isaac remained something of an enigma. He was unfailingly polite and considerate, but there was a reserve about him that Lillian found difficult to penetrate. She would catch him watching her sometimes with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, but he never said anything beyond the ordinary pleasantries of ranch life. A week after her arrival, Isaac announced at breakfast that he would be making the supply run to the town of Elkhorn the following day. "I'd like you to come with me, Miss Vaughn," he said, "to help with the ordering as we discussed." Lillian hesitated, anxiety twisting in her stomach. "Is that wise? What if someone from Silver Creek recognizes me?" "Elkhorn is 40 miles from Silver Creek in the opposite direction," Isaac assured her. "And Miller's influence doesn't extend that far. Besides, you can't hide on the ranch forever." His words, though gently spoken, hit a nerve. "I'm not hiding," she protested. Even though she knew it wasn't entirely true, Louise intervened before the conversation could become heated. "I think it would do you good to see something beyond these ranch borders, Lillian. And I have a list of things I need that Isaac would surely forget." Isaac raised an eyebrow at his sister. "When have I ever forgotten anything on your lists?" "There was the incident with the sugar last winter," Louise reminded him with a teasing smile. "That was because half your list had been washed away by rain," Isaac defended himself. Though there was no real heat in his words, watching them banter, Lillian felt a pang of envy for their easy relationship. "What would it be like to have someone who knew you so well, who could tease and argue with you in one breath and stand steadfastly by your side in the next?" "All right," she agreed finally. "I'll go to Elkhorn." The journey to town the next day began early, with Isaac and Lillian setting out in the ranch's wagon just after dawn. The road was rough in places, winding through stretches of pine forest and open meadows. Isaac handled the team of horses with confident ease, his hands strong and sure on the reins. They talked intermittently as they traveled. Isaac pointed out landmarks: a lightning-struck pine that marked the boundary of Double N Land, a creek where he had caught his first trout as a boy, a distant mountain peak that local Ute Indians considered sacred. "Have you lived here your whole life?" Lillian asked, genuinely curious about this man who had offered her sanctuary without question. Isaac nodded. "Born in the very house where we live now. My father built it with his own hands when he married my mother." "You must have loved them very much," Lillian observed, hearing the reverence in his voice when he spoke of his parents. "I did, still do," he glanced at her. "Louise said your mother passed recently. I'm sorry for your loss." Lillian appreciated that he didn't offer empty platitudes about time healing all wounds or her mother being in a better place. "Thank you. She was an extraordinary woman. Raised me alone after my father died, worked as a seamstress to keep us fed and housed. Never complained even when things were at their hardest. She sounds like someone I would have respected," Isaac said sincerely. "She would have liked you, I think," Lillian replied without thinking, then blushed at the implication of her words. If Isaac noticed her embarrassment, he didn't comment on it. Instead, he asked, "What brought you west after she died? Many women in your position might have sought employment in Chicago or perhaps marriage." There was a note of genuine curiosity in his question, without judgment. Lillian found herself answering honestly. "There was a man, a son of one of my mother's clients. He courted me while she was ill, promised to marry me after an appropriate mourning period." She laughed bitterly. "I discovered later that he was already engaged to a woman from a wealthy family. I was merely a diversion." Isaac's expression darkened. "Some men don't deserve the name." "After that, Chicago held too many painful memories," Lillian continued. "I read about opportunities in the West, teaching positions as shop assistants, even mail-order brides. I had enough money saved for a train ticket and decided to take a chance." "That took courage," Isaac observed. Lillian shook her head. "Or desperation. Perhaps both," he conceded. Still, not many would have made that journey alone. His respect warmed her more than it should have. They arrived in Elkhorn shortly before noon. It was a small but bustling town, centered around a main street lined with businesses: a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a blacksmith, and various other establishments that served the surrounding ranches and farms. Isaac parked the wagon in front of the general store, then came around to help Lillian down. His hands at her waist were strong and steady, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary before he set her on her feet. "Nordstrom, good to see you," called a voice from the store's entrance. A portly man with a magnificent mustache stood in the doorway, beaming at them. "Mr. Patterson," Isaac greeted, extending his hand. "This is Miss Lillian Vaughn. She's helping out at the ranch and has experience with store inventory. Thought she might assist with our order today." "Always glad for a professional eye," Mr. Patterson said cheerfully, shaking Lillian's hand. Come in, come in. Martha just put on a fresh pot of coffee." The interior of the store was neat and well organized, reminding Lillian poignantly of Mr. Whitaker's establishment in Silver Creek. Mr. Patterson introduced his wife, a plump, pleasant woman who insisted on feeding them apple pie along with the promised coffee before any business was conducted. "How are things at the Double N?" Mr. Patterson inquired as they sat at a small table near the back of the store. "Good," Isaac replied. "The spring calving went well and we're expecting a strong herd this year." "And how's that sister of yours, still turning heads all over the county?" Mrs. Patterson asked with a twinkle in her eye. Isaac chuckled. "Louise is fine and yes, still causing a stir whenever she comes to town." "That girl should be married by now," Mrs. Patterson declared. 23 and still single, Louise has her own ideas about marriage," Isaac said diplomatically. "Says she's waiting for a man who can match her spirit." "Good luck finding him in these parts," Mr. Patterson laughed. "Most men around here want a wife, not a whirlwind." The conversation continued in this vein for some time, with the Pattersons sharing local gossip and Isaac listening with patient interest. Lillian remained quiet, observing the easy camaraderie between the rancher and the store owners. It spoke of long acquaintance and mutual respect. After the pie was consumed and the coffee cups emptied, they got down to business. Isaac produced a list of supplies needed at the ranch, and Lillian worked with Mr. Patterson to ensure everything was properly accounted for. Her experience at Whitaker's store proved valuable as she suggested alternatives for items that were out of stock and identified areas where they might save money without sacrificing quality. "You've got a good head for business, Miss Vaughn," Mr. Patterson commented as they finalized the order. "If you ever decide ranch life isn't for you, I could use someone with your skills here." Lillian smiled at the compliment, though the offer sent a pang through her heart. How long would she be able to stay at the Double N? How long before Miller's men tracked her down, or before her presence brought danger to Isaac and Louise? "Thank you, Mr. Patterson, but I'm quite content where I am for now," she replied politely. Isaac, who had been examining a new shipment of tools nearby, glanced over at her words, a curious expression on his face. With the business at the general store concluded, Isaac suggested they visit the dressmaker before heading back to the ranch. "Louise mentioned you might need some clothes of your own," he explained, looking slightly uncomfortable. "She gave me money to cover it." Lillian was touched by the thoughtfulness, though her pride rebelled at the charity. "That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly consider it an advance on your wages," Isaac interrupted, correctly reading her reluctance. "You've been working hard at the ranch, you've earned it." Put that way, Lillian found it easier to accept. The dressmaker, a slim Frenchwoman named Madame Beaumont, clapped her hands in delight at the prospect of a new customer and promptly ushered Lillian into her fitting room. "Such lovely coloring," she exclaimed, examining Lillian critically. "Auburn hair, green eyes, you must wear emerald, my dear, and perhaps a soft copper." 2 hours and several fittings later, Lillian emerged with orders placed for 2 everyday dresses, a slightly more formal dress for church or social occasions, and various necessary undergarments. Madame Beaumont promised to have everything ready within 2 weeks. Isaac, who had been waiting patiently outside, rose to his feet as she approached. "All finished." "Yes, though I fear Louise's money won't stretch as far as she hoped," Lillian admitted. "Madame Beaumont is quite persuasive." Isaac smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his serious face. "Louise will be delighted. She's been complaining for years that there aren't enough women at the Double N to justify visits to Madame Beaumont's shop." As they prepared to leave town, Isaac suggested they stop for a proper meal at the hotel's dining room. The Pattersons' pie was delicious, but we should have something more substantial before the journey back. The hotel dining room was quiet at this hour, with only a few other patrons scattered at tables around the room. A waiter led them to a small table near a window overlooking the town's main street. Lillian felt oddly self-conscious as Isaac held her chair for her, aware of the picture they must present a respectable rancher and his female companion, perhaps courting or even married in the eyes of observers. The thought brought a flush to her cheeks that she hoped Isaac didn't notice. Their meal was simple but well prepared: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple cobbler for dessert. The conversation flowed more easily than Lillian expected, touching on books they had both read, opinions on the territorial governor's policies, and humorous stories of ranch mishaps. "Louise told me about the time you tried to break that wild Mustang and ended up in the water trough," Lillian said, laughing at the image. Isaac groaned. "I should have known she'd share that particular tale. In my defense, that horse was particularly cunning." "I'm sure he was," Lillian agreed, her eyes dancing with amusement. "Just as I'm sure you were the picture of dignity, soaking wet in front of all your hands. Tom Jensen still brings it up whenever I get too full of myself," Isaac admitted ruefully. "Says it's his duty to remind me I'm not invincible." "A valuable service," Lillian teased, enjoying this lighter side of the usually serious rancher. Isaac's gaze lingered on her face, his expression softening. "You have a beautiful laugh, Miss Vaughn. We don't hear it often enough." The compliment caught her off guard, warming her from within. "There hasn't been much to laugh about lately," she said softly. "Then we'll have to change that," Isaac replied, his voice equally soft. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Lillian wasn't ready to name. It was broken by the waiter arriving to clear their plates, and the spell was shattered. The journey back to the ranch was quieter than the morning's trip, both lost in their own thoughts. The sun was beginning to set as they crossed back onto Double N land, painting the landscape in gold and amber hues. "Thank you for today," Lillian said as the ranch house came into view. "I enjoyed it more than I expected to." Isaac glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "As did I, Miss Vaughn. I think after today you might call me Lillian," she ventured. A smile touched his lips. "Lillian, then, and I'm still Isaac." The simple exchange felt significant somehow, a small step toward something neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Louise was waiting on the porch as they pulled up, eager for news of town and details of Lillian's dressmaking order. As Isaac unloaded the supplies they had brought back, Lillian recounted the day's events, omitting the more personal moments that had passed between her and Isaac. "I knew Madame Beaumont would adore you," Louise declared triumphantly. "She has an eye for quality, that woman." Later, as Lillian prepared for bed, she found herself replaying moments from the day. Isaac's hands at her waist as he helped her from the wagon, his rare smile in the dressmaker's shop, the way his eyes had lingered on her face in the hotel dining room. It was dangerous, these feelings that were beginning to stir. She had no place here, not really. She was a fugitive, a witness to murder, a woman whose presence put others at risk. And yet, for the first time since her mother's death, she felt as though she might belong somewhere, or at least with someone. Sleep came slowly that night, and when it did, her dreams were filled with a tall cowboy with serious eyes and gentle hands. 2 weeks passed in relative tranquility. Lillian settled further into ranch life, her city-bred awkwardness gradually giving way to competence as she learned the rhythms of the Double N. Louise proved to be not only a friend but a skilled teacher, showing Lillian how to make soap from rendered fat and lye, how to preserve vegetables from the garden for winter use, and how to bake bread in the temperamental old oven. Isaac remained a constant, steady presence, though their interactions were limited by the demands of the ranch. He was often gone before dawn and returned after dark, exhausted from long days of physical labor. Yet he always had a moment to ask about Lillian's day, to comment on something Louise had mentioned at dinner, or simply to offer a quiet smile of greeting or farewell. Lillian found herself watching for those moments, treasuring them more than she cared to admit. The promised dresses from Madame Beaumont arrived with a ranch hand returning from Elkhorn, beautifully wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Louise insisted on an impromptu fashion show that evening, clapping her hands in delight as Lillian modeled each garment. "The emerald suits you perfectly," she declared as Lillian twirled in the more formal dress, a deep green creation with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. "Doesn't she look beautiful, Isaac?" Isaac, who had been quietly reading in his chair by the fire, looked up. His gaze traveled slowly over Lillian, taking in the way the dress accentuated her slender waist and brought out the green of her eyes. "Yes," he said simply. "Beautiful." The single word, spoken with such quiet conviction, sent a flush of pleasure through Lillian that had nothing to do with the warmth of the room. The next morning, as Lillian was helping Louise hang laundry in the yard, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders were coming up the road to the ranch at a leisurely pace. "Are we expecting visitors?" Lillian asked, anxiety immediately flaring in her chest. Louise shaded her eyes against the sun. "No, but that's Sheriff Taylor from Elkhorn. I recognize his bay gelding." The riders drew closer, and Lillian could now make out a man wearing a badge, flanked by 2 others in nondescript clothing. Her heart raced. Had Miller somehow extended his reach to Elkhorn? Had someone recognized her in town? Isaac emerged from the barn, alerted by one of the hands. He strode to meet the visitors, his posture tense but his manner outwardly calm. "Stay here," Louise instructed Lillian, moving to join her brother. Lillian didn't listen. Fear propelling her forward, she hurried after Louise, arriving at Isaac's side just as the sheriff dismounted. "Morning, Nordstrom," Sheriff Taylor greeted, tipping his hat to the women. "Ladies," Sheriff, Isaac acknowledged. "What brings you out to the Double N?" The sheriff's expression was grave. "Got some troubling news from Silver Creek. Thought you should know since your sister mentioned you had a new addition to the household." His gaze settled on Lillian. "Would you be Miss Lillian Vaughn?" Lillian's mouth went dry. "Yes," she managed. "I'll need to ask you some questions, madam," the sheriff said. "Perhaps we could speak inside." Isaac stepped slightly in front of Lillian, a protective gesture that wasn't lost on anyone present. "May I ask what this is about, Sheriff Franklin Miller?" Taylor replied, his voice hardening. "He's claiming Miss Vaughn here witnessed a shooting in his store and fled the scene. Says she stole money from the register on her way out." "That's a lie," Lillian exclaimed, anger temporarily overriding her fear. "Miller shot Samuel Whitaker in cold blood." "I witnessed it, yes, but I didn't steal anything." The sheriff held up a placating hand. "I'm inclined to believe you, Miss Vaughn. Miller's reputation precedes him, and not favorably, but I need to get your statement officially." Relief washed over Lillian. "You're not here to arrest me." "No, madam," Sheriff Taylor assured her. "I'm here to warn you, Miller's put out a reward for information on your whereabouts, $500, dead or alive." Isaac's expression darkened. "Dead or alive for a supposed theft." "Exactly why I don't believe his story," the sheriff agreed. "No shopkeeper offers that kind of bounty for a simple theft, but it means there are likely to be bounty hunters looking for Miss Vaughn. Thought you should be prepared." Louise gasped. "Surely you can do something, Sheriff." "Issue a counterstatement, or I've sent a telegram to the territorial marshal," Taylor interrupted gently. "But these things take time, Miss Nordstrom. In the meantime, I'd advise caution." Isaac's jaw tightened. "Thank you for the warning, Sheriff. We'll take precautions." The sheriff nodded. "I'll need that statement from Miss Vaughn, and I'd like to station one of my deputies here for a few days, if that's agreeable, just as a precaution." "Of course," Isaac agreed immediately. As they moved toward the house, Lillian felt her legs threatening to give way beneath her. Isaac must have noticed, for his hand came to her elbow, steadying her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, loud enough for only him to hear. "I've brought this danger to your door." Isaac's expression was fierce. "This isn't your fault, Lillian. Miller is the criminal here, not you." "But your ranch, your sister, are my responsibility," he finished firmly. "As are you for as long as you're here. I don't abandon my people, Lillian, his people." The simple phrase, so casually spoken, struck Lillian to her core. Is that what she was now, one of Isaac Nordstrom's people? The thought was both comforting and terrifying. Inside, Sheriff Taylor took Lillian's statement with professional efficiency, asking pertinent questions and making detailed notes. When she had finished recounting the events in Silver Creek, he closed his notebook with a satisfied nod. "That corroborates what we've heard from other sources," he said. "Miller's been throwing his weight around for years, but killing Whitaker was a step too far. There are whispers that the territorial governor is taking an interest in the situation. How long before that makes a difference?" Louise asked practically. The sheriff shrugged. "Hard to say. Weeks, maybe months. The wheels of justice turn slowly out here. And in the meantime, Lillian has a price on her head," Isaac stated flatly. "I'm afraid so," Taylor confirmed. "Deputy Matthews will stay here for a few days. He's a good man, steady under pressure, but after that you'll need to be vigilant." After the sheriff departed, leaving Deputy Matthews to establish himself in the bunkhouse, a heavy silence fell over the ranch house. Louise was the first to break it. "Well, this changes things," she said, her practical nature asserting itself. "We'll need to adjust our routines. No more trips to town for you, Lillian, at least not until this is resolved." Lillian nodded numbly. The brief taste of freedom she had experienced in Elkhorn had been snatched away, replaced by the familiar fear that had driven her from Silver Creek. "I should leave," she said suddenly. "Head further west or north, draw Miller's men away from here." "Absolutely not," Isaac and Louise replied in unison. Isaac continued, his voice brooking no argument. "Running alone makes you vulnerable. Here we can protect you." "Miller's men could hurt you or Louise or the ranch hands," Lillian protested. "I can't bear to have that on my conscience." Isaac moved to stand directly in front of her, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "Listen to me, Lillian. Miller is counting on you being alone and afraid. That's how men like him operate, but you're not alone anymore." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you take this risk for me?" For a moment, something raw and vulnerable flashed across Isaac's face, quickly masked by determination. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. It wasn't the whole truth, Lillian could sense that, but it was enough for now. She nodded slowly. "All right, I'll stay." The days that followed brought changes to the routine at the Double N. Deputy Matthews was a quiet presence, patrolling the ranch's boundaries and keeping watch from strategic vantage points. Isaac issued guns to all the hands and instituted a system of signals to alert everyone if strangers approached. Lillian found herself confined to the ranch house and immediate yard, her movements restricted for her own safety. The confinement chafed, reminding her too much of the weeks after her mother's death, when grief had kept her imprisoned in their small Chicago apartment. A week after the sheriff's visit, Isaac found her sitting on the bench beneath the oak tree, staring out at the distant mountains with frustrated longing. "Louise said you might be up here," he said, settling beside her. Lillian sighed. "I'm going stir-crazy, Isaac. I know it's necessary, but I feel like a prisoner again." "Again?" he questioned softly. She hadn't meant to reveal so much, but now that she had, the words tumbled out. "After Mother died, I couldn't bring myself to leave our apartment for weeks. Everything outside seemed too bright, too normal when my world had collapsed. Then when I finally did venture out, it was only to discover Charles's betrayal." She laughed bitterly. "From one prison to another." Isaac was quiet for a moment, digesting her words. "What if we rode out tomorrow?" "Not far, just to the north pasture. It's well within our boundaries, easily defensible, and the view is even better than this one." The offer was tempting. "Would it be safe? Deputy Matthews could accompany us," Isaac suggested, "and I'd be armed, of course." The prospect of freedom, however limited, lifted Lillian's spirits. "I'd like that very much." Isaac smiled, pleased by her enthusiasm. "Then it's settled. We'll leave after breakfast." They sat together in companionable silence as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. After a while, Isaac spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "I understand the feeling of imprisonment in a way. After my parents died, the responsibility of the ranch fell entirely to me. Louise was only 20, still grieving. The hands looked to me for leadership. There were moments when I felt trapped by duty, by the weight of what my father had built and left to me. It was the most personal thing he had ever shared with her. Lillian turned to look at him, seeing the profile of his face outlined against the sunset. How did you overcome it? Isaac considered the question. I stopped seeing the ranch as a burden and started seeing it as a legacy. Not just land and cattle, but a home for Louise, for the hands who depend on us, for the future generations of Nordstroms. He paused. Though the latter seemed unlikely for a while, not many young women looking to marry a rancher who works from dawn till dusk and comes home smelling of cattle. There was a hint of self-deprecating humor in his tone that made Lillian smile. I don't know about that. Louise seems to think you're quite a catch. Isaac groaned. Louise thinks every unmarried man within 50 miles is a potential match for someone. She's incorrigible. She loves you, Lillian said simply. She wants you to be happy. I am happy, Isaac replied, his gaze meeting hers. More so recently than I've been in a long time. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. Lillian felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't look away. Despite everything, a witness to murder bringing danger to your door, Isaac's expression softened. Some things are worth the risk, Lillian. Before she could respond, a shout from the direction of the house broke the moment. Deputy Matthews was waving to them from the porch, signaling that dinner was ready. Isaac stood and offered Lillian his hand. Shall we? She placed her hand in his, allowing him to help her to her feet. He didn't release her immediately, his fingers warm and strong around hers. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might say something more, but instead, he simply squeezed her hand gently before letting go. As promised, the next morning found them preparing for a ride to the north pasture. Louise had packed a small basket with bread, cheese, and apples for a picnic lunch. Deputy Matthews, a taciturn man in his 30s, checked and rechecked his rifle before mounting his horse. Isaac helped Lillian onto a gentle mare named Daisy, his hands lingering at her waist as he had done in Elkhorn. She's steady and even-tempered, he assured Lillian. Perfect for a novice rider. The day was perfect for riding clear blue skies, a gentle breeze, and temperatures mild enough to be comfortable without being too warm. As they set out from the ranch, Lillian felt her spirits soar with the simple joy of movement and freedom after days of confinement. Deputy Matthews rode ahead, scanning the horizon with the practiced eye of a lawman. Isaac stayed close to Lillian, occasionally pointing out features of the landscape or offering advice on her riding posture. His proximity was both reassuring and distracting. The north pasture, when they reached it, proved to be a gently rolling meadow bordered by aspen trees, their leaves beginning to show hints of the gold they would become in autumn. A small stream ran along one edge, its clear water sparkling in the sunlight. It's lovely, Lillian breathed as Isaac helped her dismount. So peaceful. My favorite spot on the ranch, Isaac admitted. I come here when I need to think. They spread a blanket near the stream while Deputy Matthews positioned himself on a small rise where he could keep watch. Isaac unpacked the basket Louise had prepared, arranging the simple meal on the blanket. As they ate, conversation flowed easily between them. Lillian found herself sharing stories of her childhood in Chicago, of her mother's gentle wisdom and her father's boisterous laugh. Isaac, in turn, spoke of growing up on the ranch, of learning to ride almost before he could walk, of his father's dreams for the Double N and his own plans to expand and improve the operation. I've been thinking of adding sheep, he confided. Not many cattle ranchers do, but the wool market is strong and they can graze on land that's not ideal for cattle. Wouldn't that be controversial? Lillian asked, recalling stories she had read about conflicts between cattle and sheep ranchers. Isaac nodded. It would raise some eyebrows, but the Double N is established enough to weather the gossip. And diversification makes sense, especially with the railroad expanding westward, more markets becoming accessible. His vision for the future was practical but ambitious, and Lillian found herself imagining that future, the ranch growing and prospering under Isaac's careful stewardship, children running in the yard, Louise perhaps married to a man worthy of her spirit. The thought brought her up short. There was no place for her in that vision, not really. She was a temporary resident, a woman in hiding, a complication in the orderly world of the double N. "What is it?" Isaac asked, noticing her sudden withdrawal. Lillian shook her head, forcing a smile. "Nothing. Just thinking about how different all this is from what I imagined when I left Chicago." Isaac studied her face, clearly not entirely convinced by her explanation. "Different better or different worse? Different. Unexpected," Lillian replied honestly. "I thought I might find work as a teacher or a shop assistant. I never imagined I'd witness a murder, flee for my life, and end up on a cattle ranch with a price on my head." "Life seldom follows the paths we imagine for it," Isaac observed. "My father wanted me to study law in Denver. Had it all arranged a place at a good school, lodgings with a family friend. Then the influenza took both my parents within a week of each other, and suddenly I was responsible for Louise and the ranch and 20 men who depended on us for their livelihoods." "Do you regret it?" Lillian asked. "Not becoming a lawyer," Isaac considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I wonder what that life would have been like, but no, I don't regret it. The ranch is in my blood, Lillian. I can't imagine being anywhere else." His certainty was enviable. Lillian had never felt that sense of belonging, not even in Chicago with her mother. Always there had been a restlessness in her, a feeling that she was meant for something else, somewhere else. "What about you?" Isaac asked. "Do you regret leaving Chicago?" "No," Lillian answered without hesitation. "Despite everything that's happened, I don't regret coming west if I hadn't." She trailed off, suddenly aware of what she had been about to say. "If I hadn't, I never would have met you." Isaac seemed to hear the unspoken words anyway. His expression softened, and he reached across the blanket to take her hand. Lillian, Deputy Matthews's sharp whistle cut through the air, interrupting whatever Isaac had been about to say. They both looked up to see the deputy signaling urgently from his position on the rise. "Riders coming," Isaac said tersely, immediately alert. "3 of them from the east." Fear clutched at Lillian's heart. "Miller's men," could be, Isaac admitted, helping her to her feet. "Or just travelers passing through. Either way, we're not taking chances. Mount up." They quickly packed the remains of their picnic, and Isaac helped Lillian onto Daisy, his movements efficient but gentle despite the urgency of the situation. Deputy Matthews rode down to join them, his expression grim. 3 men, heavily armed, he reported. Moving with purpose, not like casual travelers. Isaac's jaw tightened. "Bounty hunters, most likely. How far?" 10 minutes, maybe less, the deputy estimated. "They'll have seen us by now." "Then there's no point in running," Isaac decided. "We make for that stand of aspens. Good cover, defensible position." They rode quickly to the cluster of trees the rancher had indicated. Once there, Isaac helped Lillian dismount and positioned her behind the thickest trunk. "Stay down," he instructed, his voice calm but authoritative. "No matter what happens, don't show yourself." "Isaac," Lillian began, fear making her voice tremble. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It's going to be all right. Matthews and I have handled worse than a few bounty hunters." The deputy was already positioning himself behind another tree, rifle at the ready. Isaac checked his own weapon, a Colt revolver that he wore on his hip, then took up a position where he could see the approaching riders without being immediately visible. The minutes that followed were among the longest of Lillian's life. She could hear the approaching hoofbeats growing steadily louder, could feel the tension radiating from Isaac and the deputy as they prepared to confront whatever threat was coming their way. When the riders appeared at the edge of the meadow, they paused, clearly surveying the situation. Even from this distance, Lillian could see they were rough-looking men, the kind who lived by violence and thought little of it. "They're splitting up," Deputy Matthews murmured. "Trying to flank us." Isaac nodded grimly. "I see it. You take the one on the left, I'll watch the other 2. The riders were advancing now, moving slowly but deliberately toward the aspen grove. Lillian's heart hammered in her chest as she pressed herself against the tree trunk, trying to make herself as small as possible. "That's far enough," Isaac called out when the riders were about 50 yards away. "State your business on Double N land." The lead rider, a burly man with a bushy beard, reined in his horse. "We're looking for a woman," he shouted back. "Red hair, green eyes, word as she might be in these parts. No women here except my sister, Isaac replied evenly, and she's blonde. The bearded man spat on the ground. Now, that's interesting because we heard differently in Elkhorn. Heard the Nordstrom ranch took in a new woman recently, a pretty one with red hair. Whoever you're looking for, she's not here, Deputy Matthews spoke up, stepping slightly into view so his badge was visible. I'm Deputy Matthews from Elkhorn. This is private property and you're not welcome on it. The three men exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation now that they knew a lawman was present. The bearded leader seemed to come to a decision. $500 is a lot of money, he said, his hand drifting toward his gun. More than enough to make it worth dealing with a deputy and a rancher. You won't collect dead, Isaac pointed out coldly, and that's how you'll end up if you draw that weapon. For a tense moment, it seemed the bounty hunter might risk it anyway. Then, reluctantly, he moved his hand away from his gun. This isn't over, he warned. That woman's worth a small fortune and someone's going to collect. Might as well be us. Not today, Deputy Matthews stated firmly. Now ride out, and don't come back to the Double N unless you want to face charges of trespassing and attempted assault. With muttered curses, the bounty hunters turned their horses and rode away, though not before the leader cast a long, searching look at the aspen grove, as if trying to spot Lillian among the trees. Only when the riders were well out of sight did Isaac relax his vigilant posture. He moved quickly to Lillian's side, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. Are you all right? He asked, helping her to her feet. Lillian nodded, though she was trembling. They'll be back, won't they, or others like them? Probably, Isaac admitted, not sugarcoating the truth. But we'll be ready. Deputy Matthews joined them, his face grim. Those men will spread the word that Miss Vaughn is at the Double N. You need to be prepared for more visitors of their kind. We will be, Isaac assured him. For now, let's get back to the ranch. Louise will be worried if we're late. The ride back was tense, all three of them scanning the horizon for any sign of the bounty hunters returning. Lillian's earlier joy in the freedom of the ride had evaporated, replaced by a heavy dread. She had brought this danger to Isaac and his sister, to this place that had begun to feel like home. Louise was waiting anxiously on the porch when they returned, alerted by one of the hands who had spotted them riding in at a faster pace than they had departed. Her relief at seeing them safe quickly turned to alarm when Deputy Matthews explained what had happened. Bounty hunters here, she exclaimed. Isaac, this is serious. I know, her brother replied grimly. We need to prepare, double the watch, arm everyone, establish signals. As Isaac began giving instructions to the ranch hands who had gathered, Lillian slipped away, retreating to her room. The weight of guilt was crushing her. Because of her, the peaceful routine of the Double N had been shattered. The people who had shown her nothing but kindness were now in danger. She was still sitting on the edge of her bed, lost in dark thoughts, when a soft knock came at her door. Expecting Louise, Lillian was surprised when it was Isaac who entered at her invitation. Louise is organizing the men, he explained, remaining standing near the door. I wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm fine, Lillian replied automatically. Isaac's expression made it clear he didn't believe her. Lillian, none of this is your fault, isn't it? She challenged. If I hadn't come here, if I had just kept running, then Miller would still be hunting you, Isaac interrupted. And you'd be alone, without resources or protection. Lillian rose from the bed, too agitated to remain seated, but you and Louise wouldn't be in danger. The ranch wouldn't be a target for bounty hunters, and who knows what else Miller might send. We've faced threats before, Isaac countered calmly. Rustlers, land grabbers, natural disasters. The Double N stands because we stand together. His quiet confidence was both reassuring and frustrating. This is different, Isaac. This is my problem, not yours. It became my problem the moment I found you by that trail, Isaac said, moving closer to her. And I don't regret it, Lillian, not for a single moment. The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. Why? She whispered. Why would you take this risk for someone you barely know? Isaac was silent for a long moment, his gaze holding hers. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intense. Because from the moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. As if I'd been waiting for you without even knowing it, the confession stole Lillian's breath. Isaac, you don't have to say anything, he assured her quickly. I know the timing is complicated, but I needed you to understand why I can't let you face this alone. Why your safety matters to me more than you might realize. Before Lillian could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Isaac moved swiftly to the window, his expression tightening as he looked out. What is it? Lillian asked, fear rising in her chest. Riders, Isaac replied tersely. A lot of them. Stay here. He left the room before she could protest, his footsteps quick on the stairs. Lillian hesitated for only a moment before following, her heart pounding. If danger was coming to the double N because of her, she wouldn't hide while others faced it. The scene outside was chaotic. At least a dozen men on horseback were approaching the ranch, led by a figure Lillian recognized with sickening clarity. Franklin Miller himself, his expensive suit and polished boots incongruous against the backdrop of dust and ranch land. Isaac stood on the porch, Deputy Matthews at his side and several ranch hands positioned strategically around the yard, all armed. Louise was nowhere to be seen, presumably inside the house as Isaac would have insisted. Lillian slipped out the back door and circled around to join Isaac, ignoring his sharp look of disapproval when she appeared at his side. Miller, she acknowledged, her voice steadier than she felt. The businessman smiled, a cold, reptilian expression that didn't reach his eyes. Miss Vaughn. How kind of you to save me the trouble of searching the house. This is private property, Miller, Deputy Matthews stated firmly. You and your men need to leave. Miller's smile didn't waver. I'm simply here to apprehend a thief and murder witness, Deputy. Surely the law doesn't object to that. Sheriff Taylor has Miss Vaughn's statement, the deputy countered. It contradicts your version of events quite significantly. Of course it does, Miller said dismissively. Criminals rarely admit to their crimes. Isaac stepped forward, his posture tense but controlled. You're not taking her, Miller. The territorial marshal has been notified of the situation. Miss Vaughn is under the protection of the double N until this matter is resolved legally. Miller's expression hardened. You're making a serious mistake, Nordstrom. I have resources you can't imagine. Men, money, influence that extends far beyond Silver Creek. And I have 20 armed men who are loyal to me and a ranch that stood against worse threats than a silver-tongued murderer, Isaac replied coldly. Now get off my land before my hospitality runs out. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, neither side willing to back down. Lillian held her breath, acutely aware that one wrong move could trigger violence that would leave many dead, possibly including Isaac or Louise. It was Miller who finally broke the impasse, though not in the way anyone expected. He laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humor. You know what, Nordstrom, keep her for now. His eyes shifted to Lillian, cold and calculating. But remember this, Miss Vaughn, I always get what I want in the end. Always? With that ominous pronouncement, he wheeled his horse around and signaled to his men. As suddenly as they had arrived, the group departed, leaving a cloud of dust and a sense of foreboding in their wake. That was too easy, Deputy Matthews muttered, still gripping his rifle tightly. Isaac nodded grimly. He's planning something. Keep the men alert. As the immediate danger passed, the adrenaline that had kept Lillian standing drained away, leaving her trembling. Isaac noticed immediately, wrapping an arm around her waist to steady her. Let's get you inside, he said quietly, leading her toward the house. Louise met them at the door, her face pale but determined. I saw everything from the window. That man gives me chills. He'll be back, Isaac stated flatly, or he'll try something else. We need to be prepared. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity as Isaac organized the ranch for a potential siege. The hands were divided into watches, ammunition was distributed, and the most vulnerable points of the property were fortified as best they could be. As night fell, an uneasy quiet settled over the double N. Deputy Matthews had sent a rider to Elkhorn with an urgent message for Sheriff Taylor, but it would be at least a day before reinforcements could arrive if they came at all. Lillian found herself unable to sleep, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. After tossing and turning for hours, she finally gave up and made her way downstairs, thinking a cup of tea might help calm her nerves. She was surprised to find Isaac sitting at the kitchen table, a rifle within easy reach and a cup of coffee before him. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. Lillian shook her head. "Too much on my mind." "Same," Isaac admitted, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Join me," she sat, accepting the cup of tea he prepared for her. They drank in companionable silence for a while, the quiet of the sleeping house broken only by the occasional creak of the timbers or the distant sound of a guard changing watch outside. "I never thanked you," Lillian said finally. "For what you said to Miller today, for standing up for me." Isaac looked at her steadily. "You don't need to thank me for that." "Yes, I do," she insisted. "You put yourself, your sister, your entire ranch at risk for me. That deserves thanks at the very least." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "At the very least." The question hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. Lillian found herself unable to look away from his gaze, drawn into the warmth and sincerity she found there. "Isaac, what you said earlier in my room." She began hesitantly. "I meant it," he said simply. "Every word." Lillian's heart raced. "It's madness. We barely know each other." "Don't we?" Isaac challenged gently. "I know you're brave enough to leave everything familiar behind and start fresh in an unknown land. I know you're principled enough to witness a murder and refuse to stay silent about it, even at great personal risk. I know you're kind to Louise, respectful to the hands and gentle with the animals." Each observation pierced Lillian to her core. "And I know you're a man who takes in strangers without question, who puts the welfare of others before his own, who carries the weight of responsibility without complaint," she replied softly. "But that doesn't change the fact that I've brought danger to your door." "Danger passes," Isaac said with quiet certainty. "What matters is what remains when it's gone." The implication of his words that he wanted her to remain when this crisis was over filled Lillian with a mix of hope and trepidation. "And if Miller doesn't give up, if he keeps coming after me, then we'll face him together," Isaac replied, reaching across the table to take her hand. "For as long as it takes." The warmth of his touch, the steadiness of his gaze, the quiet conviction in his voice all combined to break down the last of Lillian's defenses. She found herself rising from her chair, moving around the table to stand before him. Isaac stood as well, his height making her tilt her head back to look up at him. His eyes searched her face, seeking permission for what they both wanted. Lillian gave the slightest nod, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then with growing intensity as she responded to his kiss. It was a moment of perfect clarity in the midst of uncertainty, a promise, a beginning, a declaration without words. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Not just until Miller is dealt with. Stay with me." The request was simple, direct, and utterly transformative. In that moment, all of Lillian's doubts and fears seemed to recede, replaced by a certainty she had never experienced before. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely audible but firm with conviction. "I'll stay." The sound of horses approaching at speed shattered the moment. Isaac was instantly alert, reaching for his rifle even as he positioned himself between Lillian and the door. "Get Louise," he instructed tersely. "Both of you stay upstairs, away from the windows." Lillian hurried to obey, her heart pounding with renewed fear. Had Miller returned with more men? Was this the attack they had been dreading? Louise was already awake, pulling on a robe when Lillian reached her room. "I heard the horses," she said. "Miller, we don't know yet," Lillian replied, her voice tight with anxiety. "Isaac says to stay upstairs, away from the windows." The sound of voices below, urgent but not hostile, provided some reassurance. After a few tense minutes, Isaac's footsteps could be heard on the stairs. He appeared in the doorway, his expression a mix of relief and concern. "It's Sheriff Taylor," he informed them. "With news from the territorial marshal." They followed him downstairs to find the sheriff standing in the living room, dust covered from hard riding but with an air of grim satisfaction about him. "Ladies," he greeted them with a tip of his hat. "Sorry for the late-night call, but I thought you'd want to hear this immediately." "What is it, Sheriff?" Louise asked, tightening her robe around herself. Taylor's weathered face broke into a brief smile. "The territorial marshal has issued a warrant for Franklin Miller's arrest. Murder, extortion, land fraud, they've been building a case against him for months, and Miss Vaughn's testimony was the final piece they needed." Lillian felt her knees weaken with relief. "So it's over?" "Not quite," the sheriff cautioned. "Miller's been alerted to the warrant. Someone in the telegraph office in Silver Creek is on his payroll, apparently. He's on the run, which makes him unpredictable and dangerous." "You think he might come here?" Isaac deduced, his expression hardening. Taylor nodded grimly. "It's possible. He has nothing to lose now, and he knows Miss Vaughn is a key witness against him. I've brought 5 deputies with me, and we'll stay until we know the threat has passed." The news was both reassuring and terrifying. Miller was cornered, his empire crumbling, which made him more dangerous than ever. But the law was finally on their side, and justice for Samuel Whitaker and Miller's other victims was within reach. "What happens now?" Louise asked practically. "We wait," Taylor replied. "Marshall's office has men searching for Miller. In the meantime, we keep Miss Vaughn safe." The night passed without incident, the combined presence of the sheriff's deputies and the ranch hands creating a formidable defense around the Double N. By morning, a sense of cautious optimism had replaced the previous day's tension. Lillian found herself watching Isaac as he conferred with Sheriff Taylor in the yard, struck by the easy authority with which he carried himself. This man, who had taken her in when she was at her most vulnerable, who had stood against Miller without hesitation, who had asked her to stay with such simple certainty, he had become the center of her world in a way she had never anticipated. "He loves you, you know," Louise said quietly, coming to stand beside Lillian at the window. Lillian turned, startled by the directness of the statement. "Louise, it's all right," the other woman assured her with a warm smile. "I've never seen my brother look at anyone the way he looks at you. Not even when he was courting Mary Sullivan back when we were teenagers. He mentioned last night that he wants me to stay," Lillian admitted, a blush warming her cheeks. "After all this is over." Louise's face lit up with genuine delight. "And will you?" "I said yes," Lillian replied, still somewhat in awe of her own decision. "Though I'm not sure what place there is for me here. I know nothing about ranching." "You'll learn," Louise said confidently, "just as I did. And there's plenty a smart woman can contribute to a place like the Double N beyond knowing how to rope a steer." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a horse approaching at a gallop. Both women tensed but relaxed when they recognized one of the ranch hands, young Caleb Morris, returning from his watch on the eastern boundary. His news, however, was far from reassuring. "Riders coming," he reported breathlessly to Isaac and the sheriff. "At least 20, armed to the teeth." "Miller's with them?" Isaac's gaze immediately sought out Lillian through the window. Their eyes met, a silent communication passing between them, concern, determination, and something deeper that needed no words. "Everyone inside," Sheriff Taylor ordered. "The house is the most defensible position. Deputies, take your positions." The next half hour was a flurry of activity as the ranch prepared for siege. Furniture was moved to block windows, water buckets were filled in case of fire, and ammunition was distributed to everyone capable of using a firearm. Lillian found herself loading rifles alongside Louise, both women grimly efficient in their task. "I never thought I'd be defending my home against a small army," Louise remarked, handing a loaded Winchester to one of the deputies. "I'm sorry," Lillian began, but Louise cut her off with a shake of her head. "Don't you dare apologize. This is Miller's doing, not yours, and when this is over, we'll celebrate justice being done together." The first shots came just as the sun reached its zenith. Miller's men had spread out around the ranch house, using outbuildings and fences for cover as they fired at the defenders inside. The sheriff and his deputies returned fire with disciplined precision, their experience evident in the methodical way they picked their targets. Isaac moved from window to window, directing the ranch hands, encouraging them with calm authority despite the chaos of battle raging around them. Lillian stayed with Louise in the kitchen, which had been designated as a makeshift infirmary, ready to treat any injuries among the defenders. "They're trying to circle around back," one of the deputies reported, ducking into the kitchen for more ammunition. Sheriffs sent 2 men to cover that approach. The sound of gunfire intensified, punctuated by shouts and the occasional cry of pain. Lillian's hands trembled as she prepared bandages, her mind filled with terrifying images of Isaac being hit, of Louise caught in the crossfire, of the double N burning to the ground because of her presence. A sudden crash from the front of the house made both women jump. "They're at the door." Someone shouted, followed by the deafening report of a shotgun. Isaac appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face streaked with sweat and gunpowder. "Get upstairs," he ordered urgently. "Both of you. Use the back stairs and stay in my room, it's the most secure." Louise moved immediately to obey, but Lillian hesitated. "Isaac, please, Lillian," he interrupted, his voice softening despite the urgency of the situation. "I need to know you're safe." She nodded reluctantly and followed Louise up the narrow back staircase that led from the kitchen to the second floor. Isaac's room was at the end of the hall, its heavy oak door and single window making it a natural fortress within the house. Louise barricaded the door as best she could with a dresser, then checked the revolver Isaac had given her earlier. "Let them come," she said with grim determination. "I've never missed a target at the county fair, and Miller's men are a lot bigger than tin cans." Despite the dire circumstances, Lillian felt a surge of affection for this brave, practical woman who had welcomed her so warmly into her home. "Thank you, Louise, for everything." Louise squeezed her hand briefly. "Save your thanks for when this is over. And then you can tell me all about how you're going to make my brother the happiest man in Colorado territory." The sounds of battle continued below, growing more intense as Miller's men apparently gained entry to the house. Lillian and Louise crouched by the door, listening intently to the chaos below, trying to discern what was happening. A sudden silence fell, more terrifying than the gunfire had been. Then a voice, cold and commanding, carried up the stairs. "I know she's here, Nordstrom, the witness. Give her to me and maybe, just maybe, I'll let you and your sister live." Miller's voice sent a chill down Lillian's spine. Louise's hand tightened on her revolver, her expression fierce. Isaac's reply was too low to hear clearly, but the tone was unmistakable defiance, not submission. Miller's response was a bark of laughter, followed by what sounded like a scuffle and a pained grunt that might have come from Isaac. Without conscious thought, Lillian was on her feet, moving the dresser away from the door. "What are you doing?" Louise hissed, trying to stop her. "I can't let him hurt Isaac because of me," Lillian replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "This has to end." Before Louise could protest further, Lillian had opened the door and was moving down the hall toward the main staircase. At the top of the stairs, she paused, taking in the scene below. The front room of the ranch house was a battlefield. Furniture overturned, windows shattered, men crouched behind whatever cover they could find. Sheriff Taylor was bleeding from a wound to his arm but still on his feet, his deputy Matthews beside him. Several of Miller's men lay motionless on the floor, while others maintained their positions, guns trained on the defenders. In the center of the room stood Miller himself, elegantly dressed despite the violence around him, a revolver in his hand. And on his knees before the businessman, a gun pressed to his head, was Isaac. Lillian's heart seemed to stop. "Miller." She called, her voice carrying clearly over the tense silence. All eyes turned to her as she stood at the top of the stairs, unarmed and terribly vulnerable. Miller's face split into a triumphant smile. "Miss Vaughn, how kind of you to join us." "Let him go," Lillian demanded, descending the stairs with deliberate calm. "It's me you want." Isaac's expression was agonized. "Lillian, no." Miller pressed the gun harder against Isaac's temple, silencing him. "Indeed it is, Miss Vaughn. You've been a most troublesome witness. But we can rectify that now. If I come with you, will you leave the others alone?" Lillian asked, reaching the bottom of the stairs. The ranch, the people, all of it untouched, Miller considered, his eyes calculating. A tempting offer, but I'm afraid my reputation requires a certain thoroughness. The double N has defied me. That cannot stand. Your reputation, Lillian laughed bitterly. Your reputation is already in tatters, Miller. The territorial marshal has issued a warrant for your arrest. Your empire is crumbling as we speak. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Miller's face, quickly masked by bravado. Then I have nothing to lose, do I? All the more reason to ensure there are no witnesses left to testify against me. He raised his gun, aiming it directly at Lillian. In that moment, several things happened at once. Isaac surged upward, knocking Miller's arm aside. Sheriff Taylor and his deputies opened fire on Miller's men, who returned it with equal ferocity. And from the top of the stairs, Louise's revolver barked once, twice, the bullets finding their mark in Miller's chest with deadly accuracy. The businessman staggered, a look of almost comical surprise on his face as he looked down at the spreading red stain on his expensive waistcoat. His gun clattered to the floor, followed shortly by Miller himself. What followed was chaos. The remaining bounty hunters, seeing their employer fall, either surrendered or attempted to flee, only to be cut down or captured by the sheriff's men or the ranch hands who had been positioned outside. Lillian found herself moving on instinct, rushing to Isaac's side where he knelt beside Miller's body. "Are you hurt?" she demanded, her hands frantically checking him for injuries. Isaac shook his head, pulling her into his arms with desperate intensity. "I'm fine." "But you, Lillian, what were you thinking? He could have killed you." "I couldn't let him hurt you," Lillian replied simply. "Not because of me." Isaac's expression softened, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Don't you understand yet? There is no because of you. There's only us together, facing whatever comes." The simple declaration, made in the midst of chaos and death, struck Lillian with the force of revelation. This man, this strong, steady, honorable man, saw her not as a burden or a responsibility, but as a partner, an equal. Someone to stand beside, not someone to protect from behind. "I am not wanted here," she whispered, echoing the fear that had haunted her since her arrival at the Double N, the fear that she was an intruder, a danger, a temporary guest in a place she could never truly belong. Isaac took her hand, his grip warm and sure. "You're wanted more than anyone," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "By me, by Louise, by this place that needs your spirit and your courage." And then he was kissing her, there in the midst of the aftermath of battle, with Sheriff Taylor organizing the prisoners and Louise directing the hands intending to the wounded. It was a kiss of promise, of future, of certainty, a claiming and a giving all at once. When they broke apart, both slightly breathless, Louise was standing nearby, a satisfied smile on her face despite the smudge of gunpowder on her cheek. "About time," she declared. "Now, if you two are quite finished, we have wounded to tend to and a house to put back in order." Isaac laughed, a sound of pure joy that seemed to chase away the lingering shadows of violence. "Yes, madam," he replied, helping Lillian to her feet but keeping her hand firmly in his. "We're just getting started." The weeks that followed were a time of healing and renewal. The damage to the ranch house was repaired. The wounded, including Sheriff Taylor, whose arm would bear a scar but retain its full function, recovered. And the legal aftermath of Miller's death was addressed with surprising efficiency by the territorial authorities. Lillian gave her testimony to the marshal, a formal accounting of the murder she had witnessed and the events that had followed. With Miller dead and his network of corruption exposed, justice for Samuel Whitaker and Miller's other victims was finally achieved. Life at the Double N gradually returned to its normal rhythm, though with one significant change. Lillian was no longer a guest or a fugitive, but an integral part of the ranch's operations. Her experience with bookkeeping proved valuable as she took over management of the ranch's accounts, freeing Isaac to focus on the practical aspects of running the Double N. As autumn painted the aspen trees gold and brought a chill to the morning air, Isaac took Lillian to their spot on the hill beneath the oak tree. The view was even more spectacular with the trees changing color, the ranch spread out below them in a patchwork of autumn hues. I have something to ask you, Isaac said as they sat on the bench, his usual confidence giving way to an endearing nervousness. Lillian smiled, sensing what was coming. Ask then. Isaac took her hands in his gaze steady on her face. Lillian Vaughn, from the moment I found you by that trail, something in me recognized you as mine. Not as a possession, but as the other half of myself that I didn't know was missing until you appeared. Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes, but she remained silent, letting him continue. These past months have been the most challenging and the most rewarding of my life, Isaac went on. I've seen your courage, your kindness, your determination. I've watched you build a place for yourself here, not just in my heart, but in the very fabric of the Double N. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a simple but elegant ring, a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds set in gold. It was my mother's, he explained. Louise insisted you should have it. Isaac, Lillian breathed, overwhelmed by the gesture and its significance. Marry me, he said simply. Be my wife, my partner, the mother of our children. Help me build the future of the Double N. Stay with me, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because this is where you choose to be. The tears she had been holding back spilled over as Lillian cupped his face in her hands. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. I choose you, Isaac Nordstrom. I choose this life, this future, this home we'll build together. The kiss they shared was a sealing of that promise, a beginning rather than an ending. When they finally broke apart, Isaac slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit that seemed like yet another sign that they were meant to be. Louise will be unbearable when we tell her, Isaac remarked with a grin as they walked hand in hand back toward the house. She's been planning our wedding since the day you arrived, I suspect. Lillian laughed, the sound carrying on the crisp autumn air. Then we'd better not disappoint her. A spring wedding, perhaps, when the wildflowers are blooming. Spring it is, Isaac agreed, squeezing her hand. Though it seems a long time to wait. We have the rest of our lives, Isaac, Lillian reminded him softly. A few months is nothing compared to that. As they reached the house, Louise was waiting on the porch, her expression expectant. When she saw the ring on Lillian's finger, she let out a whoop of joy that brought several ranch hands running, thinking there was trouble. Finally, Louise exclaimed, embracing first Lillian, then her brother. I was beginning to think I'd have to propose for you, Isaac. The celebration that followed was spontaneous and heartfelt, with the hands offering congratulations and Tom Jensen producing a bottle of good whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion. As the sun set over the Double N, casting long shadows across the land that would be their legacy, Lillian found herself standing slightly apart, watching the people who had become her family in such a short time. Isaac joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist and pressing a kiss to her temple. Happy? He asked softly. Lillian leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him, the unwavering support that had been her anchor since that first day on the trail. More than I ever thought possible, she replied truthfully. When I left Chicago, I was running away from pain, from betrayal, from a life that had lost its purpose. I never imagined I'd find this, Isaac prompted, curious. Lillian gestured to the scene before them, Louise laughing with the hands, the ranch house glowing with warmth and light against the darkening sky, the land stretching out in all directions, wild and beautiful and full of promise. Home, she said simply. A place where I'm wanted, where I belong. Isaac's arms tightened around her. You've always belonged here, Lillian, even before you knew this place existed, just as I was waiting for you, even before I knew your name. As the stars began to appear one by one in the vast Colorado sky, Lillian knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world, not in the bustling streets of Chicago or the rough frontier town of Silver Creek, but here in the arms of a quiet cowboy who had seen her value when she was at her most vulnerable, who had claimed her as his own not with force but with a gentle invitation. Stay. And she would, for all the days to come,